And I want to welcome Dr. Leslie Field, who is a wonderful addition to not only our church, but our choir sometimes. Her background is a bachelor's and a master's from MIT in chemical engineering. She's got a master's and a PhD in electrical engineering from Berkeley. I'm happy that I have just one degree. She's also an adjunct lecturer at Stanford, and I have actually been I have audited that class. It's been fascinating to hear the variety of climate researchers who are trying to address many different aspects. I highly recommend it if none of you have audited it before. She also, at one point in time, worked at Chevron and worked on removing lead from gas. She has started 2 consulting firms, and they're specializing in healthcare area and climate change. In 2006, I remember this because she talked to me about it. She looked at her son and she said, "What is his future going to be? Can I do something?" And that's when she started ICE 911, which is now Arctic Ice Project. She has left that project in 2022 and started Bright Ice Initiative. And these are some of the things she's going to be talking about today. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. Do I need to speak into this?
No, but please remove your mask.
Yeah, all right. I do need to speak into this. All right.
And actually, I'm going to interrupt for just 1 second. At the moment, we only have one person online, James Harris. If you want to speak up, we can hear you. So I'll just let you know that that's the case.
Telling me that I don't need to speak into this.
Yes, you do need to speak into that. Otherwise, he won't hear you.
All right, got it. Hello, James Harris. Hello, those of you here in person. Thank you for that wonderful introduction and invitation, Linda. And I will say I looked into the eyes of my 2 kids at that point. They were 6 and 10 years old. And yeah, I felt like a Mack truck had hit me after I saw the Al Gore Inconvenient Truth movie. It was life-changing. And at HP, one of the other jobs in the middle of the various places that I have worked, at HP, I had a wonderful mentor who got deep in our heads as she was trying to do the world's best industrial research lab. This mantra said long ago, I think by a rabbi, of if not me, who, if not now, when. And once you've got that in your head, it's hard to get rid of that. You have to act. So here's the class. You would be welcome to audit if you wished, especially if you were content to audit by looking at the recordings afterward. I'm teaching this winter right now. And I'm glad the students like what I do. Okay, that one for some reason is clobbered. One thing that I cheerfully start them out with is, we have an unstable climate now. This isn't a problem for, 2050, we've got a lot of time to clean this up. No, this is a problem right now. And it's a dire problem. And you know the list, right? We've got fires, we've got droughts, we've got lack of ability to be able to grow food. We'll soon have sea level rise to an extent enough that a lot of, currently habitable places won't be. We've got these storm surges. It's a mess. And there's been a lot of people saying for quite a while, even, the only thing we should do, let's not do anything radical. It's technology that got us into this in the first place. Let's just stop emitting CO2. And while that has been the number one thing that everybody, who sets policy, it seems, has been saying for a long time, the curves have only gone up. So if that's how we're doing on the one thing we're supposed to be doing, we're in deep trouble. So this is a mess. You know it. I'm not going to try to depress you too much because we will get into the what can you do about it. But before we move there, NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, tabulates how much damage have we had so far. I don't know who pays for this. I'm not sure anybody does. I think, if you've lost, your livelihood, your home, you may not ever get any recompense to get it back. But $2.155 trillion over the last few decades in one country alone in this world, which is the US, is what we've seen. And it's been an accelerating curve of deaths, of climate events that are over $1 billion. That's all they bothered to tabulate was any event, climate event that was over $1 billion. It's terrible. So there's a lot that needs to be done to just deal with trying to, weather those storms. And here's their map that they had of where these things had happened in one of these years. The good news may be that the death toll has gone down a little bit. Even though the events are still accelerating, we may be getting better at predicting and warning. Yay. So we used to think this was in the future. It's not. We have not taken enough action. How on earth will we cope? And so how do we get here was the first question that I really want people to understand, and that is these CO2 levels. And how did that happen? Why didn't anybody know? Well, the truth is, we'll get there in a minute. The truth is that lots of people knew. People at Exxon, some of their incredibly brilliant scientific team knew this. And they, in fact, turned it around and did an interesting advertising job, Each day, Humble, the old name for Exxon, supplies enough energy to melt 7 million tons of glacier. It's true. They did. But they, at that point, we thought we were heading for another ice age. Those were the climate predictions back then. And how does it cause warming? If you are curious, Columbia Climate School will inform you on that. So why do I care about ice? And I started out caring about sea ice. So that was nonprofit number one, Ice 911. And the reason is that we've gone through an incredible change. And I'm not going to play the whole video there because we don't have time. I thought I had another slide that doesn't go through. At any rate, okay. The idea is, and you will see a slide that will get to this, we have lost a lot of our ice, and I seem to have skipped that slide. Well, that's too bad. We have lost an incredible amount of our ice over time. And this beautiful, I guess I can't really get up there to point. Maybe not. That beautiful ice shield has been reflecting summer sunlight away for most of human history in those 24-hour-a-day sun shining on the Arctic seasons. That doesn't happen anymore. We don't get to reflect as much away. We've got about 1% of the multi-year sea ices left now that we used to have in that area. That's the Beaufort Gyre you're staring at. That's a big problem. And to me, that's a key leverage point. Because if you have something that is making a huge effect, just a positive feedback loop, the more it happens, the faster it keeps happening. I suspect we don't have time with the late start to go into much of that. But that means that if you could do something to change that, to make the ice last a little longer, even a little longer, you could have a large positive impact on things. So that's the deal with sea ice. Why am I not working on sea ice right now? Sorry, this is confusing to me. And that is because we never could get permissions to work directly on sea ice. The closest we got was a standalone pool up in the northern part of Alaska where we could see the Arctic Ocean, but we couldn't test there. And I've been an engineer long enough that I really believe in this one statement, which is the difference between theory and, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. And what I know is there's always an unintended consequence in just about anything you want to do. And if you can't test it, then you're never going to be able to develop your solutions to a point where you can actually, have them workable. So because we couldn't get permissions to work directly on sea ice, I also became aware that there are some people who are very concerned living up in those areas who feel that they've gotten the bad end of things from the US in general over time. they're perfectly right. The more you learn about it, the more you know. And so the framework considerations of having people understand that you would be very happy to, you want to, co-lead with them and collaborate with them on solving the issues that they're seeing that are dire to them is the way to go. And it means that a localized approach is the way to go. So you want to be able to really understand what difficulties are you facing. Would you like help with this, that, or the other? Can we work together on this is the way to go. And that meant that understanding that sea ice permissions were still not likely to come anytime soon because people worry, well, something will go global. What if there is some problem you haven't detected yet? No, it's going to take a long, long, long time to get an international agreement. That when I got invited to work on glaciers, I said, oh, heavens, yes. Because there are real problems right now. In the Himalayas, Pakistan's been a third underwater for quite a while now. Hopefully they're drying out. In the Himalayas, water supply is a terrible issue. You have problems with not having water flowing down at the time that you need it to for the temperature that you need to grow your crops. And so this has been the water tower of the world. People have been calling it that. It will affect at least hundreds of millions of people, possibly billions. It depends which metrics and how soon you're looking at. And you have to work with everybody. You have to, get peer-reviewed literature that's transparently done. You need to work with the local communities. You need to get your permissions before you can even begin to test. It goes on and on. And so this is one of the much broader aspects of what we do that have taken a while to really get frameworks in place. I'm proud that the scientific organization that I like to work with, American Geophysical Union, which has tens of thousands of climate scientists as part of it, so I get to keep learning, has updated their framework for this of how do you actually move forward with these tests in a safe, acceptable way. And I got to be part of the panel because I've got some actual field experience with helping, okay, here are the issues we've run into, here's what we need to know. So that's been delightful. I seem to be going backwards again. Okay. Come on, we'll get there. So why focus on albedo? It's a key leverage point. As we lose our reflectivity, as we turn into a darker ocean, up there in the Arctic in particular, things get warmer and warmer and warmer. Albedo is something that we can do something about. I have been looking at safe reflective materials. What I asked myself years ago after looking at my kids, as Linda was saying, and thinking, they're doomed if somebody doesn't do something. And who? Well, if not me, who, right? I asked myself something that was in my technical wheelhouse, which was, is there a bright, safe, reflective material that could help ice last longer? Simple question, really. If you happen to have, done a minor in materials and things like that. And this is one thing that I'm passionate about teaching my students at Stanford, why I'm taking the time to teach, is if you can frame a question in your wheelhouse that might have a good answer, you're so far along the way on maybe doing something of use to people. So that's a big deal. That's why we do that. And localized interventions, you can call them climate interventions. That still sounds kind of radical, but what you're really trying to do is give people more community resilience, community adaptation to the conditions that are coming. We had a very depressing guest lecturer on purpose a couple weeks ago, John Englander, who was a sea level rise specialist. And, the whole point was, okay, as soon as his lecture is over, the following week, we're going to have the person who comes in and gets people all revved up about creating solutions to solve impossible problems. And so that's why you would want to start brainstorming on localized interventions. What could you do? What could I do in my backyard to get me off the PG&E powered grid? I wonder that a lot. Those are the sorts of things you can think about. And with a background like, as you've heard described, electrical engineering, sensing, that sort of thing, there's a prayer. I've just been talking up to my old research group in Berkeley about that. I would love to see somebody come up with something great. So you get into fewer legal issues, fewer hassles, no moral hazard, you're not, and you can get local permissions. So this is a delightful way of working. This is what things have looked like in a Minnesota homeowner's pond. And this has been our best test site. It's a lined pool, a lined pond that he dug when he built his home. And this is where our peer-reviewed literature has come out with, our best, most solid data sets have come out. So something I've been testing for quite a while is something called hollow glass microspheres. Those are those little round guys on the far end there. And you can see that an untreated control area or an area about to be treated, these darker bits of ice immediately get brighter as soon as you put on a material like this. What's safe about this material? It's not plastic. It looks like microplastics, but it's not. It's silica. And it's silica in a glass form, which means it's not sharp. It's not going to cause asbestosis. It's not small. You're not going to inhale it. It's got a lot of really good features. However, we've had to move on because it's not something that's going to stay in place on a glacier. It's going to roll downhill, and we've been testing that. But here's how bright, that's the same area right and left just before, just scraping the snow off the ice to see what color is the ice and then putting these materials there. It works really well on a flat area. We've taken all our results and fed them to climate modelers, fed the relevant things to them. So we spend a lot on instrumentation to figure these things out of long wave, short wave radiation, what is the temperature, what's what. And it says that should permissions ever come for treating sea ice, we could make a huge difference over a few years of just treating a specific area. And I've asked the climate modelers to model two particular areas, the Beaufortshire and the Fram Strait. They're key for different reasons. And we don't need to carpet things. Your environmental risk goes up if you're trying to carpet a whole ecosystem. It's why people hate the idea of things that would be a global treatment. So this is what it looked like testing up in Alaska on a pond. We got permission to work on a pond up there in Utqiagvik. And we always worked with a local native corporation. It was a kick. And this is what things look like at Tony's Pond in Minnesota. Drone footage from above showing us treated areas stay bright, untreated areas start melting out over the course of the season. But last year, I said yes to glacial ice. And the reason is all of this story I've been building for you of if you can actually co-lead with people who live there. We're working with a local, she grew up in the Himalayas, a local person who is an expert in environmental impact assessments and water quality assessments. So it's exactly what I've wanted. And we're working hard on that. And we're still looking for the permissions. We're so close to get the permissions to work on a Himalayan glacier this year. But in the meantime, that one went out of order. There's broad view things of, let's treat our whole atmosphere, or let's do localized resilience. Sorry about that. So we have some real interesting areas that are in dire need. Greenland has land-based ice. Anything that has land-based ice that's melting and can go into the ocean is going to accelerate sea level rise more than something that's already floating in the ocean. Because, it's like if you've got a piece of ice in your glass of water, your level doesn't change as that ice melts. Food security, it's, to me, all of these dire things that you're reading on the board mean endless war if we don't slow this down, if we don't have enough food or water or space for people. That's not going to be great. We're collaborating. We've collaborated in Iceland to do some pre-testing to get ready for India, and that has been delightful with the Icelandic Meteorological Office. And we are looking forward to working in India at a particular glacial site that the glaciologists we're working with and the environmental impact assessment specialists have worked in a lot, over many years, Jota Shigri. And so those are the things that we're looking at. And then I wanted to give you just some photos of what glacial ice is like, right? This is things you can find from satellite imagery and various other beautiful photos. How much it's been melting, Greenland's losing tons of ice, all of this. I am not going to show you this, but if you want that, if you're hanging around later, I could show you just the footage of the largest calving event there ever was in Greenland. That's been caught on film. James Baylog chasing ice. This is an amazing thing. It really got to my students. This is what the Langyakul Glacier, where we've now worked on glacial ice, looked like. It's got a lot of dark areas. You can see that's me on the right. Greg, who built your play structure steps on the left here, came along as a volunteer, which was really cool. So one of those sons that I've been, thinking about, trying to make sure they have a decent life. And this was our crew from the Icelandic Met Office. I'm not in the picture because I'm taking the picture, but it happens that way. There, I made it into that one. And you could see perhaps in this first photo above, the amount of junk that you have to carry along. It's not actually junk, it's all kinds of equipment, boxes and pipes and all kinds of things to set up the instrumentation that's going to actually tell you what happened there, because this is all about really diligent work. We got so excited when we saw how much brighter this got from our treatment and how it stayed in place. And then we got a little less excited when it looked like we don't have as much brightness after a big old storm came through. And that's so important. That's why we need to do testing. That's why we need the funding to do testing and the permissions to do testing, so we can tell, oh, this was a lot better than our rolling down the hill microspheres would have been, we think. But we're not there yet. We've got something else to do. So, being the person who loves to learn that I am, I'm deeply immersed in another part of the literature trying to figure out how could we make this stuff stay in place. So it's an interesting problem, but it's the stuff I happen to enjoy, so that seems to be Leslie's best self. I thought I had, oh, you reminded me I should be pointing there. I don't know, I didn't think I was out of slides. There are a few more slides one could show of us applying things by hand into these areas, but I'm not sure I've got access to them right now. We've tried. We've tried that. We actually got a special machine, a farming agricultural seed spreading machine adapted to be able to do that up in Utqiagvik once, and we spread, more than usual that way. But usually it's been by hand, and it's small scale experiments. That's fine. But and the photo you're not seeing is us, which you could cluster around the computer later if you have time, and I'll show you. But us, my son and, oh, I guess you did see my son and I spreading these materials, by hand with a little seed spread, sifter thing. And we made that a community thing. We had them all pre-weighed by the guys in Minnesota had actually pre-weighed this stuff for us. And then we're just, okay, as long as we only use one bag that's been pre-filled that we know the weight of at a time, we can take turns. We can have 3 of these little spreader things and we can all do this in parallel, and then it became a community thing. And I think that's a nice way to do things, especially when you're doing localized engagements with people, so they can see there isn't something crazy going on here. And why I like doing something on the ground is if there's some terrible environmental effect, which we study it very carefully to start with, but if there did turn out to be one, it's going to be localized. We're going to catch it really quickly. My son and I also spent a lot of time getting samples before and after putting materials on above and below the place that we were, treating. And that's a lovely data set that we've now got. The Met Office went ahead and contracted with a local university to get the samples measured, so we know. So what we used to talk about for sea ice was something like 60 micron thickness overall, maybe 5 or 6 layers, very, very small really. As long as you're above a 10 micron diameter material, you're not going to be inhaling it. And so anything above 10 is fine. We were using something that was on average about 60 micron. So that was, I think we've given up on our slides. Okay. Questions? Yes, please. Yeah, you're asking the right questions. And I used to have as the biggest words on my original website, first do no harm, don't mess it up. Oh, of course. Thank you. The question is, what if animals get into this? Is there any deleterious effect? What are the materials? The reason I went with a silica glass to start with is because that's one of the most common materials on Earth, if not the most. It's in all our rocks, it's in all our marine ecosystems, it's in all our rivers, and it's present there as sandy stuff, as sediment, and it's also there as dissolved silica in the oceans. So it's something we all evolved with. And I like that a lot because it says you don't have anything really, really weird. You get to plastics, and I know people look at this and it looks kind of similar to microplastics, but it's very different. You get to plastics, and I wanted the anti-plastic basically because I had worked in the oil industry trying to get lead out of gasoline, and I have great respect for how toxic just about everything to do with oil is. And so the last thing you want is something that's going to want to accumulate oil, something hydrophobic, meaning, like oil and vinegar, it's like the oil part of that. You don't want something like plastic that's going to be attracting any oil-based pollutants that are there. So we've made sure that we've got something that doesn't really want to pick up oil, yay. We've also done environmental testing with outside labs that fed enormous quantities of this stuff to some hapless quail and, a bird species and a fish species, 6, I think, of each. Nobody had any problem with it except one in the control group, meaning they weren't fed any of that, who died. But other than that, and there was some other that lost their appetite for a day or so because you're filling up your stomach with this improbable amount of stuff. But there were no bad effects. Except, the one that died was one that didn't even get near the material. So that was just sort of the luck of the draw there. And then there's a lab that's continuing to test in Norway, Sintef Ocean. And they were one of the collaborations I formed while I was still with Arctic Ice Project. And they're really going through figuring it out. They aren't seeing anything bad. So I think there was one worm that lost its appetite for a little bit, but the other 4 species they tested, no problem. So, it's looking pretty darn benign. But again, I understand people's suspicion. I share it. It's like, you want to do what? How do you know it's safe? I mean, I would be asking exactly the same questions and have. That's why we keep getting answers for the questions. So, yeah, I saw more than one hand, though. Yeah. Yeah, well, this becomes interesting. Yes, thank you again. Ooh. Who are we trying to get permissions from? And how close are we? So in Iceland, it's been a piece of cake. The person that we worked with who ran the scientific conference where we got to meet him in Reykjavik was, part of the Icelandic Meteorological Office, and he got permissions from 3 different levels of government. Boom, boom, boom. I'm not even sure what we paid for that. It was negligible compared to the other logistics costs. It's like, wow, thank you. In India, this has been going on for well over a year. I think we're coming up on 2 years to try to get permissions. They have a much different culture of permissions. They've got a much different way to approach things. And it's, we're supposed to be close now. We've got a glaciologist there who is working with us and who is getting the permission from his dean of his school. So he works for one of the academic institutions. Those will tend to be slower than a Met office anyway. I mean, I know that from any university I've been near. But we almost have it. And I think that the fact that I'm asking for not just a signature for them to say, yeah, okay, you can do this, but asking for, is there some local communities that we should be getting guidance from and permissions from and collaboration from, which seems essential. That's part of what AGU has created as the needed framework, and I agree with it. That's a question people don't tend to ask this part of the school or the Indian ministry, and they're not sure whether they should be more suspicious because we're asking, or, does that mean it's hazardous? So it's, we'll see. I've been told it's a week away for several weeks now, but I just got another note just today, actually, telling me, well, it might be you just have them sign it. If the dean signs it but doesn't have to specifically say that you have their permission, but it's sort of implied, it might be okay. Which is interesting. So I've done the right response, saying, I'm forwarding this to my board and see what they say, because I'm not sure what'll fly there. We had permissions for all the work we did up in Alaska, but people then, you can have naysayers who just hate any sort of idea of intervention whatsoever coming back to you and claiming you didn't have permissions. It's like, but we did. We had it right there. We were carrying it around with us. We got it from the local people. But it's, you got to be very solid written record if you're in a world where what you're doing is kind of controversial. More hands, yes. I'm going to ask all the way in the back because you probably feel doomed. Yeah.
I read recently about a group doing something, research on putting up some kind of a sun shield. Do you know anything about that?
Well, there are various approaches, and I heard about that actually from Eric today. There was years ago a proposal. So what about a sun shield? And there was years ago a proposal, somebody whose last name was Angel, so that stuck with me, who wanted to put up trillions of orbiting solar mirrors. And the questions you get into are, oh my God, what is the fuel cost, the pollution from that? How would you ever undo that if you decided, wait, we're failing to get our crops growing? There's a lot of unintended things that could be hard if you did that. If it were one deployable sun shield that you could then have some way to undeploy, that might be okay. And then the place that we know has been most controversial in this sort of space is where people are proposing to dim the sun by putting up stratospheric sulfate aerosols. And that is something that cools things down. It also poses risk to the ozone layer. And it's also a pollutant that's really hard for anybody with asthma. So, there's an emotional response there that a lot of people have because there is no undo switch there except waiting. So, yeah, it's a tempting thought. We certainly don't have to put out the sun to get out of this imbalance we're in, but it's something that's going to get people worried. And then, yeah, there were far more questions. Okay, Linda. The one who invited me. Yes.
Yeah, I'm wondering about production of the materials that you're using and transporting it, and if it eventually is going to be deployed, that means pretty major production. And I'm just wondering about that process and how you're looking at that.
Yep. So the questions are, how on earth do you get this put out there? How much will it cost to manufacture? What about the greenhouse gases that would be emitted from doing that? Yeah, thought about that a lot. One thing that makes me very happy, if we were to stick with the hollow glass microspheres, is there are at least half a dozen major companies that make these already. They're used already in a lot of applications in building materials to keep them more thermally resistant. So you can keep your building cooler or hotter. If you're putting that as part of what your building material stack is. And I like that because fundamentally you're again harnessing mostly air. Those bubbles, those non-filled areas is a pretty good way to stop heat escaping or building up. There's a vendor that is now working on, they got slowed down by the pandemic. I haven't checked in with them lately, but they wanted to use recycled glass as the way to make their materials. That lowers the footprint a lot. The cost should be a lot lower as well, but certainly the GHG footprint would be lowered. One thing we talked about doing way back, quite a number of years ago, was to perhaps carry these around in the ocean on ships and put them up a blower and see, blow them over the areas that you wanted to make brighter, which has its own merits and its own worries. And it certainly doesn't comfort people who are worried about, but where will it go? And I'm not convinced that's a really good idea. There are other ideas about, doing things. I like the idea of instead pouring it off the back of your ship if you actually were convinced that this had no harm to it, and maybe putting it in at a critical time where it would freeze into the ice. But yeah, that's an unfinished problem. But we have to know what material we're trying to work with first, and I'm not convinced we're there. Yes, there was another hand up.
I don't understand what will happen if, when you wish to have the material, the microspheres, deteriorate. They won't deteriorate, and so we'll have glass in our oceans?
Not true, actually. That is a worry. That's certainly a worry. And we've had student groups looking to see whether anything sharp was coming out. But the thing is that these things, glass dissolves in the ocean eventually. And it dissolves because it'll go faster depending on your pH, faster or slower depending on how acidic or how basic your water is. But it does degrade over time into just all that silica as a dissolved substance in the ocean, which there's tons of already. It's an essential nutrient to some of the life in the ocean. So, but it's something to look for, yeah. You do not want to have all kinds of chunky, spiky glass in the ocean. This is true.
Well, do we have anything to define like the term over time? I mean, as we know, almost everything degrades over time. But sometimes we're talking years, sometimes we're talking hundreds and thousands of years.
Yeah, I think we're talking no more than a year or two, I think. And that's based on Tony's Pond again, because that's a test bed where we've put in a lot of stuff over a lot of years to test this out. And we tend not to be able to find that later. And when we've done this diligently at that test pond in Utqiagvik that we were allowed to work at, what we found was that it likes to, it's hydrophilic. It likes things that are wet. And so it clings to mud, it'll cling on the underside of pine needles, it's just clinging to whatever debris it's got. And in Tony's Pond, he's convinced it's been sinking as it picks stuff up. So do those have effects? I mean, it all requires a lot of study. But the material we're using now that's trying to stay in place better is a clay, and people seem less worried about that. What I like about that is it's a clay another one of my colleagues in Minnesota found and has been working with a manufacturer on. It's flat. It's not intrinsically going to roll around, and it's denser. So if you want a steep slope, it's a better choice, but it's not perfect yet, as you could see from that little bit of photo that I got to show you of, over time, the bright area didn't stay as solidly bright. Some of it had clearly washed down. So we're still looking for the right answer. Yes, Kurt.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I love Rover's question, but it was too short. I mean, the answer was too short. You said maybe a year. As good news, it's going to be not around long, but can't we deploy it for more than one season somehow?
There's that. I'm not sure you can, and I'm not sure you'd want to. If you have an area that's a hot spot that you want to be able to cool down, that following year, think about going back and forth between La Nina and El Nino conditions. The following year, that might not be the right place for you to put that in, and I've always wondered about that. The other part, to give you more of an answer, because you're right, the too long, I could lengthen the answer. Syntef Ocean, that wonderful marine biological lab that's doing a lot of testing and has found, one worm has perhaps a problem, but nobody else has so far. One worm's type, I think. But part of what they're typifying, I got to help them put the proposal together, so they were asking a lot of the questions I like. What is the fate of these materials eventually? How do you figure that out? What is the material fate? And this is one of their specialties, and it's one of their specialties because they've been working on what happens with oil pollution over time. So they really, they've got an expertise of trying to detect toxins and trying to detect, some deleterious effect. And we'll see, they're beginning to publish their work now. They haven't, I don't think they've made it all the way through peer review yet, but, which is a lengthy process, which tells you that things are really trustable once you get there.
Okay, that was a continuation of Rover's question, but now my own personal question.
Here we are.
Well, I'm guaranteed short in a minute, but I first of all wanted to just thank you. Great gratitude. I was thinking about three things: your spirit, and also your comprehensive intelligence. It's very large and wide. And then your determination. It's Pat and I had that word lately these days, and it sure applies to you. That's the gratitude part. So
Well, thank you.
The small question was, I didn't quite hear the answer, or maybe there's not an answer yet, is what about when your stuff blows away too soon?
Now that one we've got covered. I have appreciated the materials that we chose because the other great part of being hydrophilic, besides not picking up oil-based pollutants, is as soon as they are on something that's even got a little bit of free water there, ice that's melted, maybe a teeny amount, maybe just the ice itself, they just stay. They want to be there. They will blow along on top of a wave. They're light. They will, but they don't become airborne again. So once they're there, they want to be with their kind, with their hydrophilic folk. Yeah. To personalize our materials. Good question. Is there anybody online who has been dying to get a word in edgewise here? Possibly not. Okay. Yes.
What bright ice is doing and Arctic ice.
Okay.
The difference between bright ice and Arctic ice projects.
Which also comes to why did I leave, right? Yeah. You just asked it very tactfully. I became convinced, finally, that we were not going to get sea ice permissions within any soon time frame. And we don't have that kind of time to just wait. And so when I got invited to work on glacial ice, I of course took it to, my group, to Arctic Ice Project, and said, well, let's do this. And they're like, no, we like the mission you initially had. And that went for months, trying to convince them that this is what we really needed to do. And I never got any closer on that, nor could I get them to sign something to say, we don't care about that, she can do this on her own time and there'll be no conflict of interest. That didn't happen either. So that's where that went. After months of trying to, I'd been with that group. I had started it up in 2008. I'd been with that group for 14 years at that point. It was a very painful decision, but it was a decision of, I can either spend my time arguing with people, trying to get this to change, which doesn't look like it's going to change, or I could just start afresh and take everything I've learned, because I've learned a lot about how you run a nonprofit at this point, and go ahead and do the thing, do my best to make this glacial ice thing work. So that's what I decided to do. And it's been a painful, it was a painful thing, but it needed doing. And I'm out the other side of that now, where I'm getting to create the opportunities that we need to see, can this work? And continue to ever more passionately articulate, we need to be working with the people in the area on the things that they're concerned about. If we're doing anything other than that, I am convinced that that's more, it's either very, very slow or possibly a dead end. And that's heartbreaking, if you don't want to throw your entire shot at maybe making a positive difference, that's a heartbreaking place to be. So, yeah, I've taken everything I've learned about all of that, and it's, I don't know, I'm feeling bright-eyed again. Yeah, thanks for asking that. Oh, no, this is a worldwide problem. Yeah, where you're seeing it most quickly has been in the Arctic. And it's because when you've got this sea ice there, you've got this 24-hour-a-day sunlight in the summer months, right? And you've got this ice sitting in a warming bathtub. And so that's part of what's driving that positive feedback loop. But it's I've now been to convenings for people worrying about Antarctica. There are now 61 solutions proposed for preserving Arctic ice, by the way. People have recognized this. I mean, I think people around here in town probably thought I was insane when I'd go to a party and say, what I'm really worrying about most is how to save Arctic ice. And they're like, what? But, there's 61 different methods people are proposing now, which feels pretty good, maybe one will even work better than what I've come up with, and that would not be a loss as far as I'm concerned. That would be a good thing. So, yeah, but it's not just the Arctic. Antarctica, Greenland are really dire threats to sea level rise, really dire. And, there's a lot of other areas where they're just running out of the agricultural water they need, right?
Thank you so much, Leslie.
Thank you.
I think working on glaciers, there's been pretty dramatic information that's been coming out showing how much glaciers are changing. And that's what really struck me when you first said, I'm working on the world's glaciers. And I thought, yes, that affects everyday people's lives. So that was part of my saying, you need to come tell us about it. So I'd like to thank you so much. This has been great for us to have this opportunity to ask you questions. Okay.
Good questions, y'all. Good questions. Thank you.
And there is a flyer that shows a couple more things coming up in terms of talks, and we're hoping to have one more talk after that. So, and there's Leslie's class to audit. So I would recommend that for anybody, and she's got information on that.
Thank you. And I've got cards here if you want to be able to remember the name of the nonprofit and how to get in touch with me. If you email me and if you pester me often enough, I will send you the links to the recordings of the class, but I'm noticing it takes people 2 or 3 times to actually, it's like, I was going to email that. So, so yeah, thanks a lot, everybody.